Hello everyone, and welcome back to another class. Today I am switching it up and we are going to be doing an acrylic class. Mostly my sample here is this little teacup with some pansies in it. So I have my colors here, which are titanium white, raw umber, phthalo blue. This is quinacridone magenta, just your cadmium yellow, and yellow ochre. And so we'll be stopping at different points. Oops, I splattered on there when I was getting my paint out. I'll be drawing at different points to so I can keep building my layers. So I'm going to start off with the background. So I'm going to pull a little bit of this phthalo blue out. I'm just using a bigger brush here for the background. Pull some of that out. You can see it's a very bright, vibrant blue. And I'm going to come and I'm going to bring some white and a tiny bit of yellow here to that. So you can kind of see some of my proportions here. That might be a little too much yellow. I'll kind of pull that in as I need it. It's always easier to start out a little bit at a time. Ochre there. This is one I did quite a while ago. I have never done this one as a class. So I'm trying to, that might be a little different color here, but got here, but I can kind of mix to that point. Let's go bring it up a little more to the green side. Let's go a little brown too, just a tiny bit. I'm kind of getting that teal range. All right, so I don't need to have necessarily that exact color. White there, so I'm okay with that color there. That's kind of a nice, this is just a background, kind of a nice soft teal. So depending, I'm gonna be careful with not painting the edges too much because I don't want to have those touch against everything. So usually I'm just going to kind of lay in a base color. Let me make sure you can see that, or did I move it out of the range? All right, okay. You see I'm going to come down to probably about this point here. So a couple key things to remember. You know, when your paint is wet, if you bring in another, like if I picked up a stronger blue like that, the more I go back and forth over it, the more they're going to blend. And usually when on a background like this, you can see I've got some little subtle streaks in here. What I want to do is do some things that are going to make my background visually interesting. If it's all one color, it's going to look flat. So like now that I've got kind of a layer on everything, and I've brought in a little bit of this stronger blue. And I think I'm going to lighten this up a little bit up here. So I'll pick up a little white on my brush. And I'm just going to kind of feather that in. So I'm using long, smooth strokes. So when I want to feather out that edge, I'm going to kind of lift up and let that kind of, feather away. And so you can see I've kind of lightened here, darkened here. I've got a little bit of movement going on, and just to make that interesting. And the same concept I've done in here, it's just to make it interesting. It's the background, I'm not going to worry about it too much. Okay. Rinse out my brush. I always want to make sure I've rinsed it thoroughly so when I blot it off I don't see any color in there. Part of that rinsing off is getting your brush down in the water and making sure that you are kind of whipping it and beating it to open up the bristles. So I'm going to use my yellow ochre now, and I'm going to kind of bring a little bit of magenta in here to kind of get that orangish color. So a little more on the magenta side than probably what I need. But I'm kind of fine with that in there. What I'm doing is I'm trying to use a little more of a limited color palette, just so I know I've got a little more harmony between my colors. So here's where I want to be careful, because that other paint is wet. I don't want them to interact too much, otherwise I'm gonna kind of end up with a mess. So the paints that I'm using are, the brand is Master's Touch. You find this at Hobby Lobby. I love this paint. It's very durable. And then, so all the colors are Master Touch except for the magenta, which is the Liquitex Basics. So where I do classes, those are the paints I use in my classes there. And it's also the paint I'll use like in the artwork that I show and sell. So, and that's going to be more like mixed media, abstract. I'm going to turn this just a little bit so I can kind of get up in here and just kind of strengthen that line a little bit. Tell you one thing you want to be careful here on doing. I'm going to go back over that because I want to make sure I'm not getting that little rolled edge on my paint. If you do that, that will show through into your cup. You'll see that little ridge of paint on there. Okay. So here I can pick up a little magenta, bring a little variation. That magenta is a fairly transparent color, where the yellow ochre is a lot more opaque. All right, and then I'm going to go ahead and dry this. And I'll see if I'm able to edit out the sound of the dryer. If not, I'm sorry. And that is the great thing about acrylic, is that you can just dry and go. I'm going to move this back over here and make sure I'm still lined up in my camera view. Alright. So I'm going to sketch in the teacup. For that, I'm going to be using just a piece of chalk that I've wet to make it a little softer. So here I'm going to kind of make the top part of the cup. I want like a nice little skinny oval. And then I will bring down the sides of the cup. And this is my chance to kind of make sure that those are symmetrical. This is the bottom of the cup. It's going to have the same kind of curve that this has here. And just a little simple handle. And then we also have the little saucer that it's on. And if you found that was a little too hard, you could always leave that part off. And it doesn't show up very well on that color there. Let me see if I can get with some white. And then bottom of the cup here. Okay. All right. So I am going to just put a base layer in for the cup right now. And I am going to switch to just a little angle brush here. So on this, like I said, how that magenta is a fairly transparent color, I'm going to mix a little bit of white in with that. And then I can come in and deepen back up if I need to do a second layer. But that little bit of white is going to help to bring a little opacity to it. So like the more that you paint, when you start to kind of learn those properties of your colors, then it's a little less frustrating because you know it's not you, it's just that that color is a transparent color. It's actually one of the things I like about that magenta, because sometimes you can do some cool things with that. Okay, so I'm going to start in here. Just going to come down the edge, fill that in. So while we're painting along, I would ask if you like the content that you're seeing. It does help me out if you can subscribe or click on the bell so you get notifications. And that's just telling YouTube that you like the content, and that helps the channel to grow on as far as like how much exposure they will give me, especially just starting out on with a new channel. But I've been posting a lot of watercolors, but I wanted to try to get a couple acrylics in. Okay, so I'm just getting that. So if I want to not lose that edge there, I can always just kind of mark that in for now if I'm afraid I'll kind of lose where that's going to go. And then I'll go ahead and get my handle in. Now if you're at home and you want to do something a little more fancy, like a little handle with some swirls, that's fine too. Okay, so here's where I need to kind of adjust. I see this side of my saucer is a little bit bigger than that side. So I probably should add just a little bit more over here, just so they read a little more symmetrical. And that's probably a little better. And then I've got this little, like, kind of edge here, the part that's actually touching the ground on the saucer. Put that in. Now I've got a really wonky little line there. So easy way to fix that, I just rinse out my brush. I want a brush that's got a good clean edge to it. And I can just come right along here, that side, and lift off that wet paint. I don't have to fuss about it. I'm going to go ahead and put my dirt in. So I'm just going to use this raw umber here. I'm going to fill this part in. And you can either use this straight, or you could bring a little bit of the yellow ochre into it if you wanted it a little lighter brown. Okay, so I think I'll pick up a little bit of that and just kind of tap that in. Alright, and so here is a place where I would dry this and then continue on. So when you're layering your colors like this, you know, I mentioned how that magenta has it's fairly transparent. So here's where you can kind of see a little bit of that blue background through there, even though I've put some white into it. So this is one that we know that we're going to need 2 layers to get kind of full coverage on that. So it's the second layer that, as I add that in, you know, I can also kind of create a little contour to it. So I do want my strokes to kind of follow that contour of a little bit of curve to it, a little contour of the cup. And I'm going to have a little white edge along some of this, so I don't have to get too fussy right now. Okay, come down on this side. I pick up a little white, I can even kind of bring a little bit this way just to highlight that a little bit. Then to kind of make this side a little darker, you can pick up a little tiny bit of blue mix that here with our magenta. And we can come down this way. Kind of shadow that side a little bit. Okay, so now I'm going to focus on the part of the cup. So let me get that handle. Strengthen up that color there. Here I'm just picking up a little bit of the straight magenta just to kind of deepen that color a little bit. Just giving a little blend to it. Alright, so I've got a little wonky spot right here. That's not a big deal. So that's the thing, when you see you make a mistake on something, just go ahead and clean it up right then. Don't wait until that paint is dry. And then you've got now a new mess to tend with. I do want to bring a little bit of a deeper color here. A little more of that blue purple. Okay, right here under the cup. Okay. And here with that straight magenta, again, I can bring that around. I have to say, I'm used to my paint when I'm painting like this. Watercolor I like to do flat, but when I'm painting in acrylic, I usually tend to have it up in front of me. And I can tell you that when this paint is wet, sitting this way, I do get a little bit of glare on it. Some of these things are a little harder to see for me. We can pick up and put a little shadow in here. Maybe more of that blue. And then I'm going to come in with some white, even if it's a little bit of a dirty white, that's fine. And so I'm going to come in and I'm going to come here to the top. And bring that on around. And I can come and highlight that with a stronger white later too. Okay, I'm just going to bring a little bit highlight there, and then we're going to going to just kind of help differentiate it a little bit between where it kind of rises a little bit on the part below. Here. Probably have to wait till I dry on this because it's going on a little too thin there. All right, I'm going to dry this. So I'm going to be working up here on the flowers next. This one there is still wet. So I'm going to plan out where the flowers go, kind of give them a base coat, and then I will come in and do the leaves and then come back and finish these. That way the flowers are on top. Probably use like a little 1/4 inch size brush for this. So, so on my purple, I'm going to mix that using my phthalo blue and my magenta, and I will use some white into this for that base layer. That's a lot more blue than what we need. Up some white. So if I put it in like a base color like this and then come back over later and put that darker color. So I've got one here in the front, and so these are going to have kind of that classic little 5 petals. So if I've got one here, okay, I'm going to have one here. All the detail is going to go into these later. I just need to know their base part and where they're located. Okay, so I've got one kind of over here, so I always kind of do that top one first. Okay. Each of these. I've got one kind of going sideways here, so I have to kind of flatten that out. Okay, and one kind of coming sideways here. And I have a little partial one that's kind of here back behind some leaves that are going to kind of stick up. And so all of the rest of this, you see, you can see a little bit of, there's some open space between the parts of the plant, rather than filling it all in. So I want to hit this with the hair dryer so I'm not smearing that purple when I'm trying to put the leaves in. Just need enough that that kind of skins over for right now. It'll have some time to dry on its own. So if you notice, we don't have green, but we will be mixing that. So the phthalo blue, to mix a green, if I use this yellow here, it would be way too bright of a green. So I'm going to use this phthalo blue with some of this yellow ochre because it's more earthy and it will give me a more earthy green. Right. So let's start like in here, which I've got my brushes kind of hyper loaded there. So I have a leaf kind of coming here, and I'm just going to pull that down and kind of make those little serrated edges. And then I can even kind of have that come in up underneath, you know, part of that leaf, that petal there on that flower. Okay, so there's not going to be a whole lot to this right now. Okay, then I also have one that's kind of over top of it coming up in here, so that's going to kind of fill in here, and I'll bring a little lighter color so we can know where that difference is. So that this one's going to end right up in here. Okay, so I've got one coming on this side, so I'm going to come right up here against that petal, down here. One coming down here, also over the edge of the cup. Okay, we've got one coming in and this way. It's a little kind of flatter in its position to us. Leaf doing something in there. Okay, so up here on this one I've got a leaf coming off that way. And here on this partial one I've got there's a leaf. See here, I've got like a little stem, and then one kind of coming in behind here. And then there's one coming up there. Here. So when you're placing these, depending on your flowers might be slightly different, and I just kind of, you know, look for ways to kind of fill in between things without taking over the plant here. So like here I've got a little stem coming in, connecting down there. A couple little stems you can see here. Just wipe that little edge off. And let's see here. Stem there. I'm going to bring a stem kind of coming up this way. So that's connected. That might be going that way. And then maybe a little stem is going to be going to that one. So now that I have those all in, here I can come in and give at least those stems right now, give them a little highlight. So now I'm going to come back into these leaves and find ways to bring a little more dimension to them. So I'm going to mix up a little more of my green. Yeah, like a little darker here than what I was using. And so here I can kind of come in and tap down. A little too much on my brush. Come in, I can add a little bit. Make those little edge a little darker. Some green that has a little less white in it. That's see what that's doing. So I'm going to put a little bit of this kind of darker color in, and then what I'll do is I'll just kind of come back in and smudge that around. Just with a clean brush now, just kind of soften that a little bit. So just a damp brush. Okay. And so here we need to bring a little bit of some lighter color just to kind of help differentiate that there's a leaf. Here. Okay, and then I can kind of bring some little highlights into some of the edges there. I don't tend to get too fussy with leaves. Paint them just a little more on the implied side. Okay, and this I'm going to soften up a little bit. So the star of the show are really going to be the flowers. So this just gives me enough little soft detail, little shift in some changes for different little parts of to give them some dimension. And so I'm going to kind of finish that. So before I dry this and finish up the flowers, I do want to go over and strengthen up that white on the teacup. Okay, so here is where I'm just going to come in. I only really need to do the parts that are showing. So in this, like, you could paint just the little teacup alone, and that would be a really cute painting. You could leave the saucer off if that was, you didn't maybe have time to fuss with that. I'm just doing right now, I'm just thinning that out. Just a little hint of, and I'm just going to go over this again. And then I'll smudge that in. So that's just where I put down some color. I've rinsed out my brush, so there's no color in here now. And that's just where I'm going to kind of push this around and just kind of let it melt into my canvas there, just to keep it soft. And I could maybe add a little more since this is dry now. Just a little more highlight right in here. Okay. All right, so I will dry it and we'll come back to the flowers. The thing about when you're painting, a lot of times your paint's going to get dried up on your plate or your surface, your mixing surface, before you get done. Especially me using the hair dryer that close to this is not helping. So here I just want to clean up this little edge right here. Get that in, I'm just going to kind of pull that color and just burnish it so it just blends into the rest of that. Alright. Come back here and touch up this part. And we'll make this a little stronger under here. Okay, so here is my mix of my purple. They didn't have as much of that white in it. Probably get a little more of that there. So that back petal, that very first one, the one that's kind of at the top of the 5-piece petal set, that one is going to be a little lighter. Okay, so I'm going to just take some that's a little thinner here. And it's going to be a little lighter than what the other ones are going to be. So I'm going to just come over and just kind of almost do more like a little glaze. This paint is very thin. I'm doing that top one on each of these flowers. And these will all come together when we get all the little details in, so don't fuss too much right now with that. Okay, make sure we can see that. All right, so these are going to be darker here. So I hope that you guys are finding the tutorials that I'm doing, that they've been helpful, especially like for your watercolors, just to have some little things that you can practice. Obviously doing a painting like this is going to require a little more chunk of time, but you know, when I started doing classes, I started with acrylic and then kind of expanded into some other creative classes, and then started doing watercolor. And you know, when I tried watercolor years ago, I hated it, and I realized years later that I was the problem, that I wanted it to behave and be able to do the same things that I did, like what I was used to with acrylic. And so it was my fault. It wasn't the paint's fault. I just didn't understand or respect the qualities that it had. And so when I decided to give it another shot, I realized, you know, I had to forget everything I thought I knew and just come back at it like square one. And when I let go of that, I realized how much I really like watercolors, and I love watercolors now. Just on a personal thing, I like that I can sit down and complete a watercolor painting, maybe only have 20 or 30 minutes, and it's not as messy. We went to the beach the other day, and in the time I was sitting there, I did like 3 little watercolor paintings. So I like how portable it is. So, so now I'm going to take a little white over to here. Okay, and so here on this top one, we're just going to do some little soft strokes from the middle where those 3 are kind of meeting together, and that's also going to kind of help give you a little separation in your come together. Right. Then I'm going to come in with, again, I need some dark purple. And this is where using that phthalo blue and the magenta, where they're both like fairly transparent colors. You can kind of come in, I can, deepen up right down in here, this deep part of, it's going to help kind of push that in. So right here where they come together on each of these, I'm going to deepen up now with this little deeper purple. Can you see just that each little step that we do, how that kind of keeps transforming, and then they'll all come together at the end here. We start adding those little details. That yellow is really going to pop against this dark purple, and then we'll add that little bit of highlight around these, and then that'll kind of set it off as well. I need to round that one out a little bit. Some of these edges I wasn't too worried about, because I know that they'll kind of get lost a little bit when I'm doing those little white edges in there. I think I'm going to do that next and save the centers for the very end. So I want to make sure I get some clean white. And these are heavy body paints, so I need to bring a little water into these whenever I need to push them or I need them to flow. So here's where I've worked a little bit of water into this. I can work my brush into a tip, and then I can come now and I just want to keep these soft. And then as I kind of bring these here to the front, way. And when you're doing these, remember, especially like on a round brush or any brush, the heavier you push, the more those bristles are going to splay out, and the thicker your stroke will be. Here's where we're practicing your pressure. And if you see that your paint's not showing up, you got nothing coming off of the brush, sometimes our instinct is to push harder, and then we end up getting still a line that is too thick and not just doesn't have what you need from it. So always make sure realize that in a smaller brush it's going to hold a less amount of paint, and we need to go back and refill. For the sake of time, since I'm video recording this, I'm trying to move as quickly as I can. I was painting on my own. As you can see in my sample here, I would, there's a difference if I'm painting to relax. Here I'm trying to get a job done in a period of time. Okay. All right. So our blue that we're going to use is going to be very similar to what we did for that wall color. So we're going to come in here with our blue, pick up a little white. Actually, I like that right there. Okay, and so I'm going to kind of dab in. And kind of work with the direction that each one of these is. Okay. And I want to here, I think I'm going to bring in just a tiny out my brush there. I'm just going to do a tiny bit of white in here with this, not everywhere, just to make it pop a little bit more. Just a little bit there. Okay, now yellow. Yellow is a very transparent color. And, unless I put it on super thick, that yellow just isn't going to have, it's not going to show up. It's not going to have that much presence. So here again is where I'm going to need to bring in a little white into this to give it some opacity and make it pop. And get a nice sunny yellow like this here. Here I'm going to just come in. Now technically I should dry this before I do this part. So if you find that you're not having success, just stop and dry it rather than trying to put this wet paint on right next to that wet paint. And I'm just dabbing it on. Tap, tap, tap. Okay. All right, and there you go. So I hope that you've enjoyed this. When you're doing it on your own, you can take a little more time in developing your petals. You can bring a little more contour into them and keep some of these highlights a little softer. But that'll help you kind of walk through the process. Please subscribe and check out my other videos. I'm going to try to keep a variety of both acrylic and watercolor just to help you keep your practice up, and we'll talk to you soon.